Hey guys, I want to welcome you all to this edition of our Bible and the Novel class. We are still in quarantine for the coronavirus, and so I'm joined today by 4 students from George Fox University who are enrolled in the class The Bible and the Novel, and we're going to be talking through Netflix's Messiah today. The show came out right after Christmas this year, 2020, and it provoked a lot of conversation in January, and as the way of the world, completely stopped being talked about by February. But now that we are all stuck at home and binge watching things, if you've not yet watched Messiah, it is a really interesting show that's really well done, really well written, lots of fun little kind of like bird seeds throughout it to play with the viewer. And so I highly recommend it as something worth binging on this coronavirus season. I don't know, is that a season? Whatever it is that we are in right now, during this quarantine. So today, as we're working through this show, we're going to start out by talking, I think, about the characters, because one of the questions that came up a lot from students as they were watching this and preparing was to talk about like what compels belief, what makes belief possible, what are sort of those dynamics of belief. So I thought maybe we'd start just by jumping in and talking about some of these characters and helping to kind of orient, like, where are they starting from as human beings? Are they inclined to believe or not believe? And then what compels their individual belief or disbelief in Al-Masih as the show develops? Does that make sense? So, let's start with Ava. She's kind of our, one of our big students. One of the big characters in this. What did you guys think of her? What was your impression of her character?
I'm horrible at names. Can you remind me of who she is?
Sorry. Yeah, it's really hard to film, hey, because you don't have like a book with it hitting in front of you all the time. She is the the CIA agent.
Got it. Cool.
Who we first see her, she's having the fertility treatments. Husband's died of cancer. So what do we make of her kind of epistemic positioning? What sort of a person is she?
She definitely used to believe or had faith in her house at one point. But something happened that really shook that, and she's fallen away from it for sure.
What makes you say that she used to have faith?
Well, her dad mentions it a couple times, especially when he talks about her mom. And since we don't know her, we can only assume that she believed. And then also when she talks to the Messiah, she kind of stutters for a bit, like mentally, when he confronts her. And so I mean, that makes me believe that she did have faith in her life at one point.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely say that her character is a very guarded character, and you see through different life tragedies why. Like, she has a mom who seems to have some sort of like faith and then dies, which is really rocking for like some people. Like, oh, if you believe, but it seems like I don't know that they necessarily say how the mom died, but it seems like it was some sort of like tragic thing, and now the father's like rewriting how that relationship looked. And then her husband dies, she's unable to get pregnant through like IVF treatments, and so she just seems like a very I think a character that we've seen a lot in a lot of movies where like they don't have a lot of like faith or hope or whatever you want to call it, because like they've been dealt some like pretty bad cards.
Yeah.
What about Aubrey, the he's not Mossad, but the Israeli agent? What did you guys make of him?
I think whereas Ava had things like almost happen to her, or like tragedies happen in her life, it seems from his character that certain decisions he took and what things he decided to get involved in led to his like tragedies, kind of he has a daughter and a wife, and something broke that relationship. He still tries to see his daughter, but yeah, so it almost seems like it was like self-inflicted almost, not necessarily on purpose, but just like certain decisions led to that.
Yeah. So we've got Ava and Aubrey, who kind of represent or who embody for us characters who maybe have some faith in their background, but have either left it because of the things they've experienced that have been too hard for them, or the things that they've done that they feel like somehow separate them from being able to believe in their tradition any longer. Then we've got Felix and Rebecca, the father, the pastor in West Texas, and his daughter. Where would we locate those characters in terms of their sort of faith journeys and backgrounds? I mean, what did you guys make of Felix? He's kind of a complicated, did you like him?
No.
Not at all.
Why not?
I don't know how to like say why I didn't like him. He was just kind of a jerk character. I mean, you could definitely tell that like he was like being very performative in a lot of the things that he did. Like he was about to burn down his church in the very beginning of the show, and then this thing happened and he wanted to like hype it up as big as he could get it. And like he was really mad when Rebecca was thinking that she was the one that the Messiah came from. And when the one scene when what's the guy's name, the guy who they call the Messiah, what's his actual name?
Payam Golshiri.
Sorry, I couldn't hear anything.
Sorry, so mostly they call him Al-Masih.
Yeah.
But Payam Golshiri, I think is his last name.
Yeah.
Payam Golshiri or something.
Thank you.
Yeah, so when he went to the press and then the pastor was really mad because he wanted to be the coordinator and he wanted to be the person who was doing everything for the Messiah. And I think it was because he wanted to know that he was secure in his like path towards being a part of history.
Yeah.
Like if this is like the next Jesus, then he wants to be the one that is in the history books. And like he doesn't want to say that, because who would want to say that they're unselfishly doing all of these things? They don't want people to know that they're doing it because they want to go down in history, but that's what he was doing.
Quite the archetypal character, hey? Go ahead, Jenna, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely a character that seems to have his priorities like out of order. He is very like into his church, but then negligent of his family, and he really wants to like make a name for himself because he is the son-in-law of like a mega televangelist, and so he feels like a lot of like, I don't know, living in the shadow of that. And so, but the way that he goes about trying to like be good at what he's doing is not the best. Like he's like, oh, I want to make something and like be able to like support my family, and so I ignore them. It's like, well, don't do that.
Yeah.
I think he's a character that like really wants to believe that Al-Masih is the Messiah. Especially because at the beginning of the show, he seems very like wavering in his faith. Obviously, he's going to burn down the church. Yeah, and so I think he really wants everything to be real, like so bad.
Yeah, it's really interesting what's coming out, that sort of dynamic of like, that Al-Masih has to be here for me. Like this has to somehow be about me. It's about my church, about, stopping me from doing this bad thing. But then, as Jennifer pointed out, that also that element of control, right? That I now have to be like in control so that I can secure my place in what he's doing. And both Cassie and Jenna, you guys have brought out like similar sort of elements, the need to like take care of his family, but in like kind of the wrong way. We see this kind of in a lot of spheres, the need to care for the family, but do it in the wrong way. The need to be loved by Al-Masih, but I've got to control it to make sure I'm in charge. I really want to believe this is real, but to the point of like neglecting the people who he's actually supposed to care for. And I think, Cassie, you're right, that he really wants to believe it. He seems to be the one that wants this to be real more than anyone else. Which is an interesting thing to ask, why? Like, why does the pastor need this to be real?
Because he's spent his whole life working towards the faith that he doesn't believe in anymore.
Yeah, no, I think that's right on. So we
and
don't.
I think it. Oh,
sorry, no.
every time. I think it reveals too that sometimes when people are like quote unquote like professional Christians, whether that's like being like a professor or a pastor, like they can still like waver in what they're doing too. Like just because you are publicly a Christian, like in your vocation and like it, and that's what your job and livelihood is like predicated on, that doesn't mean that you have this like perfect unwaveringness about how you believe and how you act in faith and what your family looks like and like all of that. So I think he kind of shows like, oh, like just because you're a pastor doesn't mean you have it all together in terms of your relationship with God and your wife and your daughter.
Right. Well, and that seems to be really important too, that so he's a professional religious person in the show. Mm-hmm. His father-in-law is a professional religious person. And then we have the Islamic fundamentalist who's leading the school mm-hmm. that radicalizes Jibril's friend. And then his kind of part who's helping Jibril learn the speech, but neither of them are developed as much as Felix and the father-in-law, right? Mm-hmm. Like those really are two professional religious folks in the show. And the father-in-law seems to be doing, like, he's completely skeptical. He's got his brand built. He's got his mega church. He's not interested in anything that's going to mess with his brand, but very willing to open up his stage to anything that will increase his viewership and bring in more cash. At least that was my read on the father-in-law's character.
Yeah.
So Felix is our lone professional religious person. And I love the fact they present him as someone who doesn't have his life together and whose faith is complicated and wavering and that he's not in a great place. And I think you're right about that's what makes him want this to be real, because he spent his life building toward it. Mm-hmm. But I also wonder if some of our dislike for him comes from the fact that he's a professional religious person. Like, we don't like the fact that he's the pastor who doesn't have it together. We don't like the fact that he's the pastor who jumps in to believe so easily, because that seems to reflect poorly on maybe all people of faith in a way or something. Like, I'm wondering if some of the because I dislike him as well, but if some of my own dislike comes from the role, if he wasn't a pastor, if he was just a dad working at a gas station, would I dislike him so much?
I think like there's a difference between like not having your life together and being honest about it, but like with Felix, he's obviously like puts on this face of everything's fine. Mm-hmm. So I think if he was a gas station worker, I think I would like him more. But for sure, yeah, if he were like more honest about just everything, it would be nicer. I would like him more. But
so it's the hypocrisy that we're also sensitive to, especially in religious leaders.
Yes.
I definitely think one of the things that I didn't like about him was the way that he abused the situation of like aid that was coming in for the tornado disaster, and the fact that so many people came to see still horrible at names, the Jesus dude. Al-Masih?
Al-Masih, yeah.
Al-Masih, okay. I need to just make a list of the names because I'm horrible. But so, sorry, getting back on track. The aid like was coming in to help the people who were victims of the tornado, but then there was hundreds or however many people came to see Al-Masih rather than because they lived there and because they needed the aid after the tornado. And they made a point about that. And I also saw a lot of parallels to that with what is happening in the world right now. And just how like some people could be abusing aid that could be coming in for people that actually need it in this disaster that's happening right now.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing, because you do have this very real catastrophe that has taken place in Dili, right? The town is leveled by this tornado except for the church. Mm-hmm. And even when Al-Masih shows up there, he just hangs out in the tent, right? He doesn't actually do anything. He's not speaking. He's not really doing anything to draw attention to himself. which we can talk about. I'd love to talk about that in a minute in terms of like his character dynamics. Also, just before I forget, another one of these like lovely, deeply elusive sort of passages, right? This potentially divine presence dwelling in a tent in the midst of the people. If that doesn't like send out like Exodus like alarm bells for you, then I have failed in my job as a teacher. So we have that this kind of, I laughed actually the second time I saw it. Is he's just kind of sitting there, all this aid's pouring in, and all these then outsiders are coming in. Why doesn't Felix organize them to help with like, okay, like Al-Masih's not doing anything, he's not speaking, he's not performing miracles, he's just hanging out. So let's take this money, let's take this aid, let's take all of these people who are here, who haven't just had their lives destroyed by a tornado, and let's get to work helping each other. Like Felix could have done that, but he doesn't. He kind of organizes, what do they call it, Coachella? It's like Coachella Gospel. Yeah. So yeah, I think that there's that the abuse of aid, the sense of like, how are you actually responding to the real people in front of you? He's so caught up in this potential second coming that he seems to not be doing the one thing he knows that Jesus in the first coming definitely demanded of him, which was to like love his neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's also part of our dislike of him. I think that's a good point.
It's so funny. He's like so set on being in control and being the person who coordinates everything, but at the same time, he like doesn't do anything without Al-Masih telling him to do something. He just sits there and wonders if he's okay, and you know, if the church is going to survive, and this and that and the other. And so it's just, I think maybe that hypocrisy too is another reason why we don't like him, because he isn't focused on what needs to be done.
Well, I want to play kind of the devil's advocate in that and say that, though, wouldn't you want someone who is a professional religious person, who is a devout follower, to like move when God tells them to move? And if he believes that Al-Masih is the second coming of the Messiah, somehow connected to his like Judeo-Christian faith in some way, or even like there's some semblance that it's just Abrahamic faith in general that Al-Masih represents, like wouldn't you want your religious leader to follow God and not themselves? So like maybe he's kind of playing into that in some sense, but I don't know.
That's fair.
I think that's a good point. It's interesting then, especially in the tent, when he comes to Al-Masih and it's kind of like, what are we doing? What should we do? And he's like, doesn't God work through you too? Like, what do you want to do? Like, this kind of puts it back on his, puts the ball back in his court to make him act, and he doesn't. He continues to kind of wait. And then he starts to organize the road trip. That becomes his answer. It seems really, again, odd. Like, why? I don't know. I'm still back in the disaster thing. Like FEMA is here. We've got tents for relief. Let's help these people. But that's just me. Okay, I want to talk about his daughter as well, though, Rebecca. What's your take on Rebecca? Do you guys like her?
Yeah.
Say more?
I feel like her faith in Al-Masih is almost the most genuine, because she wasn't pretending in the first place to believe. She wasn't pretending in general. She was just being genuine, and that was like, I mean, not super. She was just like a punk teenager, but but yeah, I think she might be the character with the most like change throughout the season, which is then in the end kind of destroyed. But yeah, so I don't know. I think it's just she was genuinely like her demeanor just changed once her and Payam Golshiri like talked and stuff and like went on that walk. So yeah, I think I really like her because of that. She's just very genuine.
Yeah, no, I think I found that too. I also found that he is the most or what I perceive to be the most himself with her. like a lot of their conversations, like where he's just hanging out with her, like it seems like some of the walls come down. And I love it when he gets to that one really cryptic answer, and she says something like basically that a lot of people hate it when you answer questions that way, like, you know that, right? Like, you're being a pain, basically. I've got too many notes, and I can't find it, but it was, do you remember that line? Do you remember that moment?
I think so.
Yeah.
Was it like when they were walking?
Yeah. They're walking, and he gives her some really cryptic answer, and she's just like, ugh. So, sorry, I'm still looking at my notes, trying to find it. Sometimes your answers are annoying. People don't like it. That's what she told him. And I love that moment, because there's also just like this honesty between her and Al-Masih that doesn't feel like she's not pretending, she's not trying to be pious. She tells him the truth, even about himself. Like, people don't like it when you do that. And he just kind of smiles. But I don't know, there seems to be like a good, like a real intimacy between them, like a real friendship. That's different. I don't know. It maybe comes from that unguardedness that you're talking about, Cassie, and that she's just herself. Yeah.
For me, she's reminiscent of two biblical characters. One, she's reminiscent of Hagar to me. Of like, she has seen the one who sees her. She gets a lot of like genuine care from like Al-Masih, which you can tell that she doesn't necessarily get from her parent figures, and so he kind of supplements that like familial role for her in some sense. But she also reminds me of, kind of in the way that she like banters with him, of the Syro-Phoenician woman that interacts with Jesus, who Jesus calls a woman a dog. If you haven't read that Bible story, it happens. And then she has like this like quick remark against Jesus, and he's like, oh wow, like you're like so wise and so great, and like he really compliments this woman, and like sees like the wisdom like in her. And so I see their interaction following with that story a lot.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good. Both of those are really great characters to relate her to. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, let's talk a couple, as we've talked about the father-in-law. I want to also just talk about the FBI agent. He's the guy who is kind of in the, and I can't remember his name, and I didn't catch it as I was writing down all the names.
Mathers, I think.
Mathers, thank you. Mathers, yeah. So he's the West Texas FBI agent. He recently, his marriage has come apart. He's with his partner now. What did you guys make of him, and especially like his own sort of responses to Al-Masih? Like, what ultimately compels his faith?
I can't remember. Do you remember? There's one point where Mathers is like, has his headphones on and watching the cameras. Do you remember at what point? There was one point where he was like really moved and like had like some tears coming down. I don't remember what he was like looking at though.
I believe that was when the prostitute who was paid to go and like seduce him was in there, and he like just turned it around and was taking care of her instead. That's what he did.
Yeah. And so it's watching that encounter after that, he's crying, and then what does he do after that?
He leaves and tells Ava that he believes him.
Yeah. So what do you guys make of that? I mean, what is it that compels his belief in that scene? Any thoughts?
I think maybe it's seeing someone that's in a religious or spiritual role that isn't like taking advantage of somebody, that's like doing like genuine care and like caring about a person like holistically. Like I think that would be like really moving to see, especially like in his line of work, like to witness something like that. He'd be like, wow, like I've never seen something like that before. Someone genuinely care about another human being in that manner.
Yeah. When they don't know that someone's watching, right? Like it's
right.
Perfect opportunity. He could totally take advantage of her.
For sure.
Yeah. It's interesting because he seems to be the only character that I've traced who was compelled by like the goodness of Al-Masih's character and teachings to faith, right? Like Felix seems to be compelled to faith because his church is still standing after the tornado and Al-Masih is there. Therefore, he must be God. Other people, the walking on water seems to have a pretty profound effect on a lot of the crowds, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Rebecca seems to come to faith because she actually just hangs out with him long enough to start to think that he might be legit. But it's Mathers who seems to come to faith because of his teachings, because of this interaction. And I think that's just something we want to kind of keep in mind as we go into this discussion, farther into this discussion now, to think about like what compels belief, and also as we jump into talking about Al-Masih's character.